We continue now at the top of Daf Chaf Daled Amud Aleph Meseches Megillah. This is Megillah Daf 24a. The Mishnah continues with Navi Shlosha. When it comes to Navi, when you're reading the Haftorah, you can actually read 3 psukim at a time and then have the translator trade. As Rashi over here says, Navi Shloshim Yirtze, you can read 3 if you want. Below Ichpis Lonim Yirtze, we don't care if the translator makes a mistake in the translation, to Lo Nafka Minei Hora, because there's nothing comes out Psak Halacha from the Navi, so it's not an issue. When it comes to reading from the Torah already, we're concerned the translation should be accurate. You should just do 1 pasuk at a time. By the Navi, you can be even 3 psukim at a time. Hayu shloshton shalosh parshios. Now, if you have the 3 psukim are actually 3 separate parshios in the Navi, so koran echad echad. Those you should do 1 at a time. You shouldn't do all 3 together. Medalgin b'Navi, you're allowed to skip around when you're laning from the Navi from one parsha to the other. Vein medalgin b'Torah, but you're not allowed to skip around in the Torah one section to the next. V'ad kamahu medalig, and how much is a person allowed to skip in the Navi? Ad kadesh lo yifsuk hamitorgaman. He's allowed to skip enough that the rolling takes the amount of time that it takes for the translator to translate. In other words, if the translator finishes translating and he's still rolling to find the next place, that's already going to be a problem. That's already a problem of a lack of kavod tzibur. Rashi over here says, "Vein medalgim b'Torah shashomeas hakofetz mimakom lemakom ein libo miyushav l'shmoa." If you're skipping all over the place, it's difficult to pay attention. We don't want you to skip in the Torah. V'ad kamu medalig b'Navi. How much can you skip in the Navi? Shelo yifsak hamitorgaman. You should do shelo yidlog mimakom shukore ela kedei sheyuchal logo lesasefer v'likros b'makom hadilog kodem sheyigmor hatorgaman targam hamikra. You have to do it in a way where you're rolling, you finish rolling to the next place before the translator finishes translating. Otherwise, it's not proper kavod tzibur that you're rolling the Navi, you're rolling the scroll, and everyone's waiting. The translator's already done. And the Gemara says, Hani gimel psukim keneged me. We talked here again about 3 psukim in the Torah. You can't lane less than 3 psukim. What does that correspond to? Amar Ravasi says, keneged Torah neviim uksuvim. That corresponds to Torah, neviim, and ksuvim. V'lo yikra l'metorgaman yosmi pasuk echad. Uvenavi gimel psukim. It said again, you don't read for the translator more than 1 pasuk at a time. By Navi, you can do 3 psukim. V'im hayu shloshtan shalosh parshios. Now, if the 3 psukim in the Navi are 3 separate parshios, korei echad echad. So in that situation, you have to read them 1 at a time. What's an example of that? Kegon kiko amar Hashem chinam nimkartem. These are all psukim in Yeshayahu, and they're all really like separate parshios. Kiko amar Hashem elokim mitzrayim yorad ami barishona. And then the pasuk also says, "V'atam malifo nu'um Hashem." These are considered 3 totally separate sections. The Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, "Medalgin b'Navi vein medalgin b'Torah." You're allowed to skip around in the Navi, but you can't skip in the Torah. Gemara says, "Uramini, we have a contradiction. Korei achrei mos v'ach ba'aser v'hakam medalig." What about the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim? He skips around. He reads achrei mos and ach ba'aser. And Rashi over here says, "Korei Kohen Gadol achrei mos b'Yom Kippurim." Mishnah hiva Meseches Yuma is a Mishnah Meseches Yuma. V'ach ba'aser l'chodesh, and then he reads the parsha v'ach ba'aser l'chodesh. V'yesh kandilog, that's skipping around. The parsha ach ba'aser l'chodesh hashvi b'parshas Emor l'kohanim, because the parsha v'ach ba'aser, that's in parshas Emor. It's in a completely different parsha, not in achrei mos. So how are you skipping around in the Torah? And so the Gemara answers, Amar Abaye. Abaye says, Lokash, it's not difficult. Kan b'chdei sheyifsak hatorgaman, v'kan b'chdei shelo yifsak hatorgaman. He answers very simple. In the case of the Navi, you could skip around even along, even when you're rolling, even after the translation is over. But by the Torah, you have to already be done rolling before the translator finishes translating. Gemara says, that doesn't make any sense. V'alok katani, what are you talking about? And this is what we taught before. We said before, medalgin b'Navi vein medalgin b'Torah. We said in the Mishnah that you skip around in the Navi and not by the Torah. V'ad kamu medalig, and how much can you skip by the Navi? Ad kadesh lo yifsak hatorgaman. Meaning, even by Navi, you have to be finished rolling the scroll before the translator finishes translating. Mechlal de v'Torah, klal lo. That implies that by the Torah, even if you roll it quickly, it's still a problem. Even if the translator is still in the middle of translating, you skip just a little bit, it's still going to be a problem by the Torah. Only by the Navi that's allowed. So the Gemara says, you're right. They have another answer. Elamar Abaye, rather Abaye says, Lokash is not difficult. Kan be'inyan echad, kan b'shtei inyanos. It depends if you're talking about 1 inyan, 1 topic, or 2 separate topics. V'atanya, we learned in a brisa that supports this as well. Medalgin b'Torah be'inyan echad. When it comes to the Torah, you can only skip around if it's the same topic. Uvenavi b'shnei inyanim. When it comes to Navi, you can even skip around to different topics. Kan v'kan b'chdei shelo yifsak hatorgaman. But in both cases, you should never skip more than the amount of times that you're rolling. They've already finished the translation. Again, you shouldn't keep the tzibur waiting. And the Gemara continues, Tanya idach, we learned in another brisa, ein medalgin min Navi l'Navi. You're not allowed to skip from one sefer of Navi to another one. That's already too much. However, uvenavi shel shnei maser, but in the Nevi'im of the Trei Aser, those are all grouped together. There's small sections of Navi, small svarim of Navi all grouped together. So there you're allowed to be medalig, you're allowed to skip from one to the other. But you shouldn't go backwards. You shouldn't skip from something at the end of the sefer, let's say, to something in the beginning. The Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Hamafter b'Navi, the one who was honored to read the Haftorah from the Navi, who pores al Shema, he also should be the one to lead the recitation of the Shema. Vu over lifnei ateva, he also should be the one to lead the tzibur and the chazar sashatz in the leading of kedusha. Vu knows he has kapav, if he's a kohen, he should be the one to be duchening. And the Mishnah continues, Vim haya katan, let's say the person who's doing the Haftorah is a katan, is a minor. So then aviv o rabo over al yado, so then his father or his rebbe, they're going to lead in his place. Katan kore b'Torah mitargem, a katan is allowed to read from the Torah, is also allowed to translate. Aval eino pores al Shema, the katan is not allowed to lead the Shema, the recitation of Shema. Ve'eino over lifnei ateva, he's not allowed to lead the chazar sashatz and the recitation of kedusha. Ve'eino knows he has kapav, and a katan also is not allowed to duchen. Pocheach, let's say you have somebody whose limbs are exposed, is not clothed properly. Pores al Shema mitargem, so he's allowed to lead the recitation of Shema. He's allowed to translate as well. Avaleno kori b'Torah, but he's not allowed to read from the Torah. Ve'eino over lifnei ateva, he can't be the chazan again, leading the chazar sashatz and the kedusha. Ve'eino knows he has kapav, also he's not allowed to duchen. Again, somebody who's not properly clothed. Suma, somebody who's blind. Pores as Shema mitargem, he's allowed to lead the recitation of Shema and translate. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol shelo ra ma'oros miyam, of anybody who's never been able to see his entire life, Eino pores al Shema, is not allowed to lead the recitation of Shema. And Rashi over here explains, Hamafter b'Navi misha ragel lahafter b'Navi tiknu chachamim shei pores as Shema. The person who leading the Navi, who's saying the Haftorah by the Navi, the Chachamim said he should also lead the recitation of Shema. And Rashi continues, who over lifnei ateva, that very same person should also be the Chazan when it comes lahotzias hatzivur b'kedusha shebetfila. Again, that's the Chazar Sashatz and the kedusha and davening. Al yodo b'shvila, we said if it was a katan that was doing the Haftorah, so the father or the Rebbe should do it in his place. Katan eino pores al Shema. Katan is not allowed to lead the recitation of Shema. Because really, Poris al Shema, you're really being motzi the Ravim in these brachas of Kriya Shema and in the Kriya Shema. If he himself is not chayiv because he's a katan, he can't be motzi others. That's why he's not Poris al Shema. V'yeino no say as kapav also is not allowed to duchen. Im kohen who if he's a kohen shein kavod shel tzibor lios kefufin lebercha. So it's not really appropriate that the tzibor should be waiting for this bracha from this katan. Pocheach v'Meseches Sofer mefarish kol shekrav near, and again he's not covered properly. His legs are visible. Pores says Shema, so we said over there again the pocheach is allowed to lead the Shema to mechuyev b'bracha because he's somebody who's mechuyev, and like we said, someone who's mechuyev can be motzi others. Avaleno kori b'Torah, but he's not allowed to read from the Torah mishum kavod Torah. That's not proper kavod Torah. V'chein lefnei hateva v'chein b'nesias kapayim genayhu letzibur. Also to lead in the other areas, let's say to lead as the chazan or to do the duchening, that's considered a disgrace that he should lead in this kind of state. And the Gemara says, my time, and what's the reason that the person who does the Haftorah, that he leads in all these other things, the tzibur? Rav Papa mishum kavod. Rav Papa says it's because of honor. As Rashi over here says, mishum kavod lahavir lifnei hateva ho'ol mamtzi atzmo l'davar she'eno kavodo tiknu lo zula kavod. The Haftorah is not such a kavod. That's something even a katan can do. So since he was doing that, so we give him something that's really a kavod. We let him be the chazan and lead the tzibur. Rabbi Bar Simi says, mishum da'asi l'insuye. If you don't let him lead, it's going to come to be a fight. Rashi over here says, Mishum insuye hadavar bali de machlokas. It'll be an argument. Ani maftir v'atot ta'avur lefnei ateva. I'm just getting the Haftorah, and you get to lead, you get to be the chazan. So again, to prevent that, the person who does the Haftorah, he'll also lead. Gemara says, Ma'ai beinayu. What's the difference between the two opinions? Seem very similar. So the Gemara says, Ika beinayu da'avid bechinam. The difference is, if we're talking about someone who's going to do it for free, let's say you have a situation where the person leading the tzibur is not getting paid anything. So then, it's not really going to be an issue of fighting. They're not going to fight over it, but there is still an issue of kavod. The person who's doing Haftorah would like the kavod of being able to lead the tzibur. And the Gemara continues, Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, V'imhaya katan, if he's a minor, aviv rabba over al yadu, so then his father or his rebbe, they're the ones that lead instead. So the Gemara says, Yamri mishum nitsuye, if you say the reason is to prevent fighting, katan bar nitsuye, who you think a katan's going to fight? But the Gemara says, 1 second, Elamai mishum kavod. The reason is because of kavod. Katan bar kavod. You think a katan needs the kavod? Elika kvod aviv kvod rabba. Obviously, there is involved in this an element of kavod for the father and the rebbe. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chav Daled Amud Beis.